Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing very well. I do want to follow up with our program yesterday. We were a little bit encouraged by Trump reaching out to a degree to the Iranians. I want to talk about that. But before we do that, I want to mention an item, and I think you have an item to mention. The one that I want to just call people's attention to is the fact that Turkey is talking seriously about identifying with BRIC. And BRIC is a group of people who have been challenging the United States for the dollar and foreign policy. And BRIC stands for, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa. And now the Turks aren't exactly happy with us for various reasons. And some of it has to do with the Kurds and Syria and this sort of thing. But I think this is very significant because there's constant talk about the challenge to our dollar. And I've always said the dollar will lose its status, but not overnight. But each little thing like this makes a difference. And if the crisis in the Middle East gets to such a point where there's a much greater split, then that will move things more rapidly. The unknown factor about this, when it comes to Iran and Turkey and all, is what the European Union is going to do. And we don't know right now. The European Unions are sort of obeying what we tell them, and they're not exactly going to resist, although they don't like what we've done with the Iranians. But anyway, the issue I wanted to call attention to our viewers is the fact that Turkey, though they've said this before, they're talking very seriously about aligning themselves with BRIC, and that just builds more. I mean, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
When you talk about China and India and Russia and Brazil, they may well end up with some clout.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to keep an eye on. I would just, first of all, I would just welcome, we've now started live streaming on Facebook, so I would like to welcome our Facebook viewers to the live stream of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Please tell your friends to watch us. The item that I would bring up, Dr. Paul, I did a little short thing on RT yesterday because big breaking news in the afternoon. Facebook has identified 32 accounts that they're not sure who the real owners are, and they suspended them all. And this is out of 2.2 billion Facebook users. They've got 32, and they immediately said, we don't know, we haven't investigated, we're not sure who's behind it, but it sure seems a lot like what the Russians were doing before. And these are kind of, these Facebook pages were kind of a little bit leftish, anti-ICE, immigration service and that sort of thing. But what was interesting, and I mentioned it on the interview yesterday, is that who did Facebook partner with to discover that the Russians are at it again? None other than the Atlantic Council. That's their partner in finding this stuff out. The Atlantic Council is now helping Facebook determine what we're allowed to read and see. Well, who is the Atlantic Council? Well, they're funded by the United States government, the United States military, NATO, and the defense contractor. So we have a situation where a U.S. government-funded entity is regulating what we can see on Facebook. How is that any different than what the Chinese do? You want to come to China with Facebook? We got to approve everything. So it's very interesting. The one thing the Atlantic Council is claiming that Russia is doing this because they want to sow divisions among Americans, which is a crazy thing. We have differences of opinion. Divisions are a good thing in a democracy, right? These people want to have ICE. These people don't want to have immigration restrictions, and they discuss it and debate it. How is it anything nefarious to have disagreements? So.
Yes.
Anyway, something to keep an eye on.
I just wanted to follow up on your announcement about Facebook, but we will continue to stream on YouTube.
On YouTube, yes,
exactly. It's not one or the other. It's either one. The person wants to
choose your favorite.
But back to the item I wanted to spend a little bit more time on, and that is on Monday we had the announcement from Trump, who said, "Yeah, I'll talk with them." On conditions, no conditions at all. And, although we kept our fingers crossed and said, yeah, let's hope so, it didn't take long. It didn't take a week. We were hoping at least maybe something would come of it like came out of with North Korea, that it would last for a little bit longer and there would be more negotiations, and that's not dead yet. But all of a sudden, the neocons must have really been on top of this because, immediately yesterday, Pompeo didn't hesitate to come out and say, hey, there's no way there are some conditions, and we know, he didn't say it, but we know that the Iranians wouldn't do it. So in other words, we're not going to let this happen. So that to me was, once again, disappointing, but it also, presents a challenge. I don't know whose interests are served by not knowing what our foreign policy is. Trump has different foreign policies, some good and some bad, but it seems like even he would do better if he just had it and stuck with it instead of saying, I'm going to do this, and then have his staff contradict him the next day. That seems to be chaotic and sort of, feeds fires into this disapproval and dislike for Trump.
It seems a weird way to do business. I wonder what it would have been like working for him. But, the whole thing started when he had this wild all-caps tweet, threatening Iran, you're going to see the worst thing you've ever seen if you keep messing with us. And then he does a flip-flop and says, hey, I'll meet with the guy, no problem, no preconditions, no biggie. That sounded good. Okay, he's doing his usual thing like he did with Kim. But then Pompeo gets up there and says, here's what he said. Trump says, no preconditions. Pompeo says, if the Iranians demonstrate a commitment to make fundamental changes in how they treat their own people, reduce their malign behavior, and agree that it's worthwhile to enter into a nuclear agreement that actually prevents proliferation, then the president may sit down with them. Total contradiction.
He's for peace on his terms alone and not even be reasonable about what had been agreed to, not mentioning the fact that it was our side that broke away from an agreement, and which means that there's every reason in the world that a logical Iranian government would be hesitant. But he used even stronger words, that the Iranian government was mafia-like, that's the kind of people they were. That is not exactly good diplomacy if you're looking for it. Obviously, there's no doubt that he wanted to destroy any hint of this. I think best I can say is Trump maybe has that little bit of thing back in the back of his brain that maybe talking to people is a good idea, and maybe that's his real position. But he's contending, with the other people. But the question that nobody seems to be able to answer, we certainly haven't answered. Yeah, if that's the case, if he has this inkling, why doesn't he get somebody to encourage him a little bit? To say that we, should be talking with people and working with people. But this whole thing that he's criticizing, as you read, how they treat their own people, and I keep thinking, what about our government? Has our government ever mistreated us? I mean, whether it comes from taxes and regulations, tells us how to live and tells us how to get onto an airplane, and endlessly it goes on. And there's so much abuse of our liberties, and the spying on us. It's so, every once in a while they say, oh yeah, the Russians probably spied on us a little bit, and that gets everybody all annoyed. But nobody seems to say that you can use the idea that the Iranians don't treat their people perfectly. But what about us? I would like to see us, have a little bit of self-criticism and improve the way our government treats us. Maybe if we were successful with that, maybe somebody will say, America's a great place. They must be a special nation. The way they treat their people and follow civil liberties, and they stay out of wars, and they mind their own business, and they don't come over here and tell us what to do. But I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, we actually just put a piece up on the Institute website that our friend Jim Bovard wrote. It's the craziest thing ever. The TSA, if from the last time you were at the airport, if they notice you've gained some weight or lost some weight, or you got a little body odor or something, they actually assign an agent to follow you around the airport, follow you out to your car, take your license plate. They put a dossier together about you, and then the next time you fly, they put an air marshal on that flight with your dossier. Or if you have a facial hair one time and you don't have it the next time. So talk about abusing Americans in the name of false security. But the Iranians were looking at this flip-flop, and it must be kind of humorous. In fact, there was a meme, I wish I would have had it, we could have put it up. It's really funny. It's Rouhani and Khamenei, and they're sitting on an airplane, they're looking at a computer, and they're laughing. And the caption under it is Rouhani and Khamenei reading Trump's tweets. It was really funny. But this flip-flop, he's going to bomb them. He wants to sit down with them. Now we can't because Pompeo said we can't. The Iranians just threw up their hands and said, we don't want to have a meeting right now. If you want to talk, go back to the Iran deal, go back to the deal that was working within that framework, then maybe we'll sit down and talk. It's probably the wisest thing for them because they know that the U.S., unfortunately, because of Trump tearing up the deal, what good is a new deal?
And it's our side of negotiation which seems so inconsistent and not open-minded at all about sanctions. We can put on sanctions, but of course they can't do it us. And you know, I was telling you, I was just reading a little bit of the history of 1812, and of course during that period of time, the French and the British were in a hot war with Napoleon was in charge of France. We were a little bit more sympathetic with the French than the British, but because we were helping out, possibly the British came and put sanctions on us, sort of blocked us from doing things and put sanctions on us, and we didn't like it. We went to war over that. We declared war, and that was one of the biggest issues. And then we do it willy-nilly and think nothing of it, that we're not violating. We're doing it for the goodness of peace and prosperity, which is nothing more than a tool of war. So we actually went to war because somebody put a little bit of sanctions on us many years ago.
And they think that sanctions are a good alternative to war. And our own behavior proves the opposite.
Right, it leads to war, right.
Yeah. But here's something interesting. You know, you pointed out earlier about how Pompeo was condemning the Iranian government. They're a bunch of mafioso. It's a total dictatorship and everything. And I'm sure it's not a piece of cake over there. But this is sort of funny. I picked this up at Reuters this morning. Now, this doesn't seem like something you could imagine in Joe Stalin's Soviet Union or Hitler's Germany. This is from Reuters. Iranian lawmakers have given President Rouhani 1 month to appear before Parliament to answer questions on his government's handling of Iran's economic struggles. You know, this is an opposition party in Parliament saying, "Hey, Rouhani, come down here. We demand an explanation." So maybe it's not perfect, but it shows that the propaganda about the nature of the Iranian government is a little bit off.
Maybe the Parliament there has a little more backbone than our own Congress has, because when you think of it, they haven't been very successful in getting the information or restoring the powers and responsibilities that they should have in the issues of war and trade. Matter of fact, you take the trade issue. The president not only can go to war anytime he wants without a declaration, they're planning on expanding those powers, but all this trade power, that is not legitimate. You know, entering these trade agreements, that was a transfer of power from the legislative branch to the executive branch, which was changing the Constitution by just passing a law. And putting on sanctions, yes, they can read and say, well, the law says he can do this, but they shouldn't make the law because the law contradicts the Constitution. You're not supposed to turn it over. Can you imagine how much slower it would be putting on sanctions and doing these things if it had to? The changes and the sanctions would have to occur in the House of Representatives. Matter of fact, it's the House of Representatives that was given the authority to deal with foreign trade.
At least you'd have a debate. But what we have is we have endless months or years of propagandizing and demonizing. Putin or whoever the bad guy of the day is the absolute worst thing ever. And then you build that up in the media, and then when Congress sits down, they're all little sheep. Oh, we better not vote no on these sanctions because this is a bad guy. We might lose our seat.
Well, the way this has gone, the little bit of hope that we had on Monday disappeared yesterday. So we're back to square one, and who knows? It may be worse than ever because this failed, and the demagogues, the neocons, get to speak out and state their position. And then it just means that the Iranian governments have to, I think one statement was, it would be impossible for us, the Iranian government, to negotiate now after what you've done to us. I mean, it would be a total embarrassment, to them after, we got out of the treaty, the nuclear treatment, and also with the sanctions. They would be despised by their own people. So it's a situation that it's not accidental. I think is exactly what the Max Boots and other neocons and Pompeo, this is what they wanted. And John Bolton, they seem to, once in a while, we think they may not have total control. But the bottom line is that they seem to win these battles. And that to me is, of course, unfortunate. But we have to keep plugging away and trying to get, maybe Trump will get some new advisors someday. He's changing them a lot lately, but the changes he's made in his first year, usually they got worse.
Yeah. Well, he is keeping us in business by all of his flip-flops. But what I find interesting about Trump's Iran policy, and by following the neocons and their decades-long obsession with overthrowing the Iranian government, he sort of put himself in a box, if you think about it. He has very few policy options open. The Iranians aren't going to sit down at the table because they don't consider him to be a valid negotiator. He's a guy who rips up agreements unilaterally, so what's the point of a new one? He's in a box there. He's in a box on invasion. He's not, I would be very surprised without a very good provocation, or as Colonel McGregor says, a real Gulf of Tonkin type of thing. He's not going to invade Iran. He doesn't want to do that. As Tucker Carlson rightly said, a war against Iran would ruin Trump's presidency. I think he's very mindful of that. He doesn't want to do that. He can't negotiate. All of the things now are sort of pinned on this idea that if they squeeze him economically enough, the people are going to rise up and overthrow. But the opposite is happening. It causes people to be more patriotic, and whatever shortcomings the Iranian government does have, they can simply blame on the sanctions and get a free pass. So his Iran policy is an absolute mess right now. It's a mess of his own making for listening to the neocons. I don't know what's going to happen.
But what I worry about is the fact that he might feel he has to express strength. You know, he does it verbally all the time. And if he has to do that, and he's not going to send a couple 100,000 troops over there, which he would need to conquer Iran. So he's not going to do that, and I agree with that. But what would he do to show strength? Not just verbally. He might use, the cruise missiles and things and target certain areas and say that they hit, well, they've restarted their nuclear program. We got a hit. Now there's none there. He might do something like that. But then that invites false flags, accidents, unintended consequences. And that's the way a lot of wars start out. They don't start off with saying, hey, we want a big war here.
Yeah.
We want to get Iran in a hot war with us, and it'll just be them and us, and we'll take care of them, and we'll let Israel get involved, and it'll be all over in a week. But it doesn't usually work that way. It too often gets out of control. So, and I think you're right. I don't think Trump wants to deal with a hot war, and he wants to. But he ought to understand that there's a limit to the tough rhetoric. Eventually, it doesn't do much good. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be a wimp, but sometimes it takes a pretty strong character to back off when you don't need to, and not have to tell people how they have to run things.
And as you said earlier, just be silent. You don't have to telegraph everything. But as we learned from the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 2006, these things can go very, very wrong. On paper, it's one thing. Israel is a very modern, powerful military. They went into Lebanon, and it didn't work out the way they thought. So I think you have to consider that when it comes to Iran as well. But I would just close again by saying we are getting awfully close to our conference, a couple of weeks, August 18th in Washington, D.C. Dr. Paul, I was a little worried at first, but ticket sales have really picked up. We've got a few left, not very many left, unfortunately. It's about on par with last year, where we do run out, and people are disappointed. They don't get a ticket, and I feel bad. You feel bad. Everyone feels bad. So, get it today if you want it. If you want to come see us, it's a great lineup. Maybe a couple of additional speakers, but right now we got about 12. It's going to be packed in there. We're going to have fun, and we'll learn something too.
Very good. Everybody's looking forward to that. Right now the conclusion is that Assad won the war, and there may be a battle or two left, but it looks like he has won the war, which means the neocons eventually lost that, and Obama lost it. He said Assad had to go. Assad did not go. So there's a victory there that has significance, and the neocons lost in that battle. But the decision about what's going to happen in Iran has not been decided, and right now, even though we get pessimistic because it doesn't go our way real quick, it may be that, long term, with the smaller war going on, maybe there will be a day when people will declare that the Iranians held out and they're in better shape than they were before. And right now, I think they in many ways are on the moral high ground. People say that the Iranians are the most terroristic. They create more terror than anybody else. And that just isn't true. They're in every country in the world. No, that's America. It's in 120 or more countries. So they haven't, yes, they've out of their interest, they were involved in Syria and other places, but that's in their neighborhood, and that's a little bit different. But there's a lot of propaganda that wants to instill this hatred toward the Iranians, and Trump had this a long time before. So yes, Assad won the war, but right now there's still a lot of contention because the triad of the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia are determined that they're not going to let things go when it comes to the Iranians. Hopefully that attitude changes. There's no reason in the world they can't work this out if people would just give up this idea that aggression is the answer to all our problems. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.